Welcome to Jackson Lewis's podcast, We Get Work. Focused solely on workplace issues, it is our job to help employers develop proactive strategies, strong policies, and business-oriented solutions to cultivate an engaged, stable, and inclusive workforce. Our podcast identifies issues that influence and impact the workplace and its continuing evolution, and helps answer the question on every employer's mind: how will my business be impacted? As states increasingly introduce legislative requirements for how companies respond to cybersecurity threats, it is more important now than ever for organizations to have a plan in place to address data breaches if and when they occur. On this inaugural episode of We Get Privacy for Work, we guide organizations through the process of creating an incident response plan, including who should be involved and how to effectively notify stakeholders. Today's hosts are Damon Silver and Joe Lazzarotti, co-leaders of the firm's privacy, data, and cybersecurity group, and principals, respectively, in the firm's New York City and Tampa offices. Damon and Joe, the question on everyone's mind today is, why should organizations have a cybersecurity incident response plan? What should be included in the plan? And how does that impact my business?
Okay, thank you, Alicia. Welcome to the We Get Privacy podcast. I'm Joe Lazzarotti. I'm joined by my co-host, Damon Silver. Damon and I co-lead the privacy, data, and cybersecurity practice group here at Jackson Lewis. And in that role, we and our colleagues who are in the group receive a variety of questions every day from our clients, all of which boil down to the core question of how do we handle our data safely? In other words, how do we leverage all the great things that data can do for our organizations without running headfirst into a wall of legal and other risks? And how can we manage that risk without unreasonably hindering our business operations?
On each episode of the podcast, Joe and I are going to talk through a common question that we're getting from our clients. And we're going to talk through it in the same way that we would with our clients, meaning with a focus on the practical. What are the legal risks? What options are available to manage those risks? And what should we be mindful of from an execution perspective? So, Joe, our question for today is, what is an incident response plan and what should it include? So sort of to set the table for everyone, you want to just talk a little bit about what is a response plan? What purpose does it serve?
Yeah, it's a great place to start. I think for a lot of organizations, when we talk about an incident response plan, there's a lot of different incidents, right, that a company may face, crises that they encounter. I'm here in Florida now, and hurricanes are maybe an incident that people might have a plan for. But we're talking specifically about security incidents, data breaches, things that may impact the organization's systems and ultimately result in some access or acquisition of personal or confidential company information that may create legal obligations to provide notification in certain cases, whether that be to federal or state governmental entities, individuals who are affected, customers, and whatnot. And so these plans can sometimes become pretty complex depending on the organization, particularly if you're in a highly regulated industry. But I think what we're going to try to do is just kind of talk about it at a high level. And for me, one thing that I think is pretty critical is in the event of an incident, sometimes just understanding how to communicate with the people who are needing to carry out that plan can be difficult. If bad guys have gotten into the system and maybe they're still or can be monitoring email, or maybe the email is not able to function at the moment, how do you communicate with those people? So having that kind of alternate communication strategy can be pretty important, and having a plan for it critical.
Yeah, and Joe, I mean, related to that, we see all the time, especially with clients who haven't been through one of these incidents previously, that they're not really sure who the people who should be involved are, both internally but also externally. If they haven't been through the situation before, someone just happens to be the manager who finds out, from an employee about, a link they clicked on or a suspicious email they got, or about the fact that they lost, their company laptop. an important, first step is for them to know who am I supposed to go to report this? And then the person who receives that report needs to know, who do I need to assemble? Who are the right people internally that are going to be tasked with managing this? And those people, there's sometimes a misconception that's just going to be an IT function and the IT department is going to handle it. But really, in a lot of these instances, it has the incident has much broader impact, and IT alone is not going to be in a very good position to respond. You're going to need people with legal perspective. You might need people with HR perspective if employee data is impacted. You might need people from the finance team if accounting data is impacted. You're definitely going to need somebody or multiple people from leadership who are able to make decisions at the highest level for the organization about how they're going to respond. And then there's also your external team, your legal counsel who can, under the cloak of privilege, help you do an investigation of the incident and assess your legal obligations. You might have a cyber insurance carrier or broker who you want to put on notice quickly. You might have a digital forensic firm that you want to have on standby who understands your systems, who can jump in quickly. So knowing who those key players are helps make the process much smoother when something like this happens. And depending on the nature of the incident, it could be pretty chaotic in those early days. And that's not the time you want to try and figure out who's supposed to be involved. And to Joe's point, try and figure out how those people are going to communicate.
Yeah, I think absolutely the roles and responsibilities of the individuals are important. One other thing, and this is not specific to the content of the plan per se, but you said something that made me think about it, Damon. And it's like, what if you needed to get a copy of the plan and your systems are encrypted? So, where do you keep this plan and the contact information and the individuals who are on it, and how do they know that they're on this plan, right? So these other things that come with what should be in an incident response plan, it's also about socializing that with those people, maybe doing a tabletop exercise and maybe keeping the plan in a place that can be accessed, or the contact information in a place that can be accessed. And certainly, you mentioned, your cyber insurance carrier. That's really a critical piece of helping to respond to these incidents, not only from the standpoint of providing resources in terms of, having the policy pay for certain expenses that are incurred, but also having gone through and helped to identify those external parts of the team that Damon referred to, that will help in responding to the incident. Because then suppose, you go out for renewal on a new cyber carrier, maybe the following year, you feel like you need to make a change, and maybe they have a different set of people in their external team. And does that mean you have to update that in your incident response plan? So I think some of the things that we're talking about are things that, you kind of have to keep them up to date. It's not something that you just kind of prepare and leave on the shelf and don't actively use it, to be sure that, a lot of this is about preparedness, and these plans can really help improve that position of being prepared. In addition to keeping the system secure, right? It's really both of those, right, Dave? I mean, that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I totally agree, Joe. And I think, honestly, there is value in the plan itself. It is in many instances a legal requirement to have the plan. But I think even more important than the document itself in most instances is building that muscle memory, going through the process of thinking through incidents. And you do want to be specific about what type of incidents you think you're most likely to face. I mean, you mentioned, the example of a hurricane that knocks out your power, or there could be a ransomware attack or a business email compromise. If you have employees that work remotely or travel, you do want to think about those lost laptops, those lost phones and other devices. If you have a website that potentially, let's say it has customer accounts that store sensitive information, there could be some type of misconfiguration of your website. I think there's a lot of value in thinking through what are the scenarios we are most likely to face, or that would have the biggest impact if they happened. And then, what are those steps we'd want to go through if those specific types of incidents happen? And how do we make sure that our team is not, trying to fumble around and find this plan and read through it and go step by step? Because that's in reality, that's not how it's going to play out, particularly if it's a ransomware attack or some other type of event where you're trying to respond quickly and things are feeling chaotic. You want people to have practice this enough that they're just acting on the plan. They remember at least key components of the plan because they're likely not going to be in a position to go through and try and first start reading up and trying to understand what the plan contains when there's an actual incident. So that piece of practicing on a regular basis and having key stakeholders involved in developing the plan, again, in my opinion, is more important than the plan itself at the end of the day in terms of the value it's going to provide you in responding to the incident effectively.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and kind of related to that is, I think we see clients wanting to have all of the state laws available and exact drafts of notifications, and to some degree that really is a good idea, I think, because if you have a sample notice to an individual, if you have a sample website notice that in the event you needed to put something out there, you would be in a better position. If you had some talking points for key people in the organization, maybe you had some FAQs for a call center if you had to have a need for that. Those are all, I think, good things to have as a starting point. But I think to Damon's point, when you're in the situation, the circumstances are going to dictate things that you just might not have anticipated, or you're going to need to tailor those sample tools that you've made a part of your plan to the actual circumstances. So I don't know that you have to worry so much about everything being perfect, because the situation is going to kind of take you in a direction you just may not have anticipated, but at least you'll have really good starting points, and that'll, I think, speed the process along so that the plan can be useful for you when it's needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And I think we've laid the groundwork pretty well conceptually for what purpose these plans serve and how, from the standpoint of using them, a lot of the work is done at the front end before you actually have an incident. When you're working on preparing a plan or reviewing an existing draft of a plan, Joe, what are the most important types of things that you're looking for?
For me, it's clarity, usability, and functionality, in the sense that if there's an incident response plan that is 40 or 50 pages, I'm looking at that saying, I don't know, that seems like a lot to work through. And, you always want to be careful, and people may have put a lot of thought into it. And so maybe what I'd recommend in that case is, why don't we do like a high level summary or a checklist or something that is coupled with that large, well thought out plan that can be more action orientated in a situation. The other thing is to make sure that it covers all of the aspects of the business. One of the things that I don't know, Damon, I think we may have talked about this at some point, but sometimes you said it at the beginning, I think, that sometimes this is a function that gets pushed to the IT department, and the IT department may focus on an incident response plan more from an IT perspective, right? How do we deal with the information system that's down? And left out of that is, well, how do we communicate about it? And how are our clients affected? Do we have contractual obligations? And all that kind of other stuff that may be relevant to the overall response. So I'd want to be sure that the incident response plan really covers the whole organization, which may include HR, it may include other business units, or even subsidiaries that, wholly owned subsidiaries that may be the parent, or even maybe a franchisor. It's not directly their business, but they want to understand we got to protect the brand because there could be those kinds of issues. So really give some thought to, is the plan really going to help us, be as broad enough that we want, so that in a situation we're able to, again, to be able to act on it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Thinking about the high level summary or the checklist that you mentioned, and I've had similar discussions with clients about how to certainly leverage the work that was done to create a really detailed plan, but also have some more accessible, actionable document to work off of and sort of keep you organized as you're responding to an incident. What are some of the key items on that checklist for you?
I think how do you communicate with folks? Who do you need to reach out to? If you think about, maybe if you're a professional service firm, right, and you need to notify your clients, where do you go for that information? How do you assess what obligations you have? A lot of focus is on data breach notification laws, which we're involved in a lot, right? At the federal and state level. But there's contractual obligations increasingly. Sometimes it can be difficult. It's like, oh, where are those contracts? And what obligations do we have? And having that available, or at least a path to them that you can easily access, can be helpful. Obviously, your broker and carrier, knowing how to contact them, and maybe some how to get to the sample forms that you need. I mean, those are some of the things that I'd like. There's other things. I'd be interested, Damon, how you might augment that list, but I think there's other things. But those are the ones that come to my mind.
I agree with all those. I think in some ways it all starts with a triage list of what are your objectives early in the. You learn that some type of incident has happened. What are the first several steps that you need to take? Because those are going to be the most pivotal in the sense, from the standpoint of the incident response plan having value, because those are the things you're going to have to do potentially very quickly and without much opportunity to deliberate and to reach out to your attorney and run it by them. Like, these are things that need to be done quickly. So, and it is going to vary depending on the organization. It's going to vary depending on the type of incident. But sometimes, if we're dealing with, say, ransomware, a big initial question is, how do we get our business back up and running? And so, we're going to want to look at, do we have backups that we can restore from? Were those backups impacted by the incident? If we don't have the backups, what other options do we have? Is there any type of publicly available decryption tool? Who do we go to try and explore that? So that's one early question, at least for certain types of incidents, is, how are we going to get our business back up and running? Another key early question is, how do we make sure that we're going to be able to do the investigation that we want to do with this incident? Because I know both of us and other members of our team have seen many instances where the client's internal IT or a managed service provider took some steps really early on in the process that resulted in the wiping of logs that otherwise might have been useful in showing that the scope of an incident was narrowed to certain systems or certain files, but those are gone, those are wiped. And so the client's left in a position where they maybe have to make assumptions about what could have been impacted that results in much broader notification than might otherwise have been the case. Of course, another consideration is this incident over, or is it a live incident? Is there still continuing ongoing threat to the systems? What needs to be done from a containment perspective? So I think, having those pieces, spelled out clearly, go away with actionable steps that people can take, are going to be really important. So in those early moments, you don't have, issues happen that then set you back weeks in terms of getting back up and running, or set you back indefinitely in terms of losing evidence. I think all of those can be really valuable to spell out. And also, again, looping back to the point of practicing, to have people think through in connection with specific types of incidents that might come up.
Yeah. Well, look, I think we could probably talk forever about writing an incident response plan, but maybe one last question, Damon. What do you think about how often, once you do have a plan and maybe you are practicing that plan, how often do you think a company should revisit and amend if they need? How often should they kind of look at it and maybe update it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think it's going to vary depending on the client's circumstances. Yeah, I think a really valuable exercise is to have a standing time on the calendar to look at it. If it's every 6 months or even every 12 months, have that meeting scheduled. And then if something happens, like you experience an incident, or you're integrating, some new technology that's going to process a lot of data, that might be a good reason to either, have that meeting sooner than was planned, or to have an additional meeting, because this really does need to be a living document. It's not going to serve you very well if it just remains static over time. And putting that time on the calendar ensures that at minimum, every 6 months, every 12 months, you're giving it a look, you're seeing whether it still makes sense in light of the way that you're handling data, and you can, have that opportunity to make corrective actions if that's necessary.
That sounds great. Definitely hope all of our clients are thinking about this, and if they don't have an incident response plan and they're developing one, that this session will give them some thoughts about that. We hope everybody enjoyed listening to our We Get Privacy podcast. And if you have any other topics that you'd like us to cover, you can email us at privacy@jacksonlewis.com, privacy@jacksonlewis.com. Thank you, Damon. This is great. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
Thank you for joining us on We Get Work. Please tune in to our next program, where we will continue to tell you not only what's legal, but what is effective. We Get Work is available to stream and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Libsyn, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. For more information on today's topic, our presenters, and other Jackson Lewis resources, visit jacksonlewis.com. As a reminder, this material is provided for informational purposes only. It is not intended to constitute legal advice, nor does it create a client-lawyer relationship between Jackson Lewis and any recipient.